Today I'm going to show you how I did a faux marble painted finish. All of the paints and supplies that I used in this project are available at frameandfrills.com. I stock all of Fusion mineral paint supplies and paints. This is a piece of furniture that I did the faux marble finish technique to. I took it all apart. I washed it really well with TSP Alternative, and then on the laminate type shelving I primed it with Ultra Grip and allowed that to dry overnight. Next, I painted 2 coats of Victorian lace for the base color to make sure that I had good coverage. This faux marble finish does use quite a bit of water as you're going along, so to make sure the paint is cured is important. For the first layer, it's cobblestone, glaze, and water equal parts mixed together. And then I wanted a natural sponge, but I didn't have one, so I cut up a synthetic one to look sort of irregular. I added the glaze, paint, and water together in an empty Fusion container. You can see it's pretty watery. So the idea here is to get some paint onto the surface in sort of a diagonal pattern, because that's kind of how marble is. The grain tends to be more diagonal. So I'm just putting that on randomly. I'm sort of making diagonal stripes. It's not very obvious in this first color, but you can see where there's paint and there's no paint. And what looks like lumps is actually little bubbles in the thinned out paint. So now I have a folded up paper towel that I'm patting, and what I'm trying to do is soften the edge of where the paint is and just it sort of blends in a little bit where none of the wet paint went. And it'll just sort of do a subtle, shadowy look. As the paper towel starts to get saturated, I fold it and replace it as needed, because I want that to be able to remove extra paint and not start adding it back on. The only reason that I'm wearing a glove is because I tend to get paint on my hand and have it on it all day, and this is so much hands in the paint with the sponge and the paper towel that I just didn't want it on my hands all day long. Fusion sticks really well, but it's very natural and it's not at all harmful. As I was going along, I kept forgetting to do the sides of the shelves, but there I remembered. I had to keep going back and redoing them. So anywhere here where I see little bubbles or little clumps of extra paint, I dab it off. Next, I have a very fine mist of water. After that cobblestone layer has completely dried, I spritz the surface again, and then I'm going to sponge on the next layer. And this is half and half with hazelwood and that cobblestone glaze mix. Doing the same thing with the diagonal pattern in a subtle way. Not quite as much coverage with this layer, leaving a little bit more open space in between. Going back and tapping on the sides, and what I tried to do on the sides of the shelf is where the dark was, that's where I followed that through, so thinking if it was a piece of marble, that grain would sort of come through on the edge as well. Now with a clean paper towel folded up, I'm going through and removing the excess and softening the edges of these irregular shapes. As my paper towel gets saturated, I fold it or get a new one so that I'm not putting paint back on it. I am continually removing the paint. At the end of this step, you'll see I spritz it again, and I'm only doing this with mineral paint. That's what I am using, is Fusion mineral paint. The way that the mineral paint reacts with the water is the little minerals actually settle and make it look so realistic, stone. It's really, really a great product to work with to make this faux finish. So here, I'll spritz it again. If I see any parts that seem like they kind of dried more than I wanted and it's just a little bit too thick, right away you can spritz it and it'll reactivate the paint. The under colors, the Victorian lace, and the pure cobblestone layer, they're not reactivating at all. I've allowed that to cure overnight, and that's totally dry. Sorry, this part right here is kind of fuzzy because the camera tripod was on the table and I didn't realize it was kind of wiggling it when I was patting it. So now, after I'm happy with how that has been patted out, I spritz it and let it sit and dry. And as it sits with that water spritz, it will let those minerals sort of settle in and give a very natural look to it. There's just a couple of spots here that I want to kind of just get a little excess water and stuff off. The idea is to give it a very irregular shape in an overall sort of diagonal form. So I'm not adding dark lines yet, but I am using the feather, which all I had was a pheasant feather. Traditionally it would be a turkey feather, but it gives a non-mechanical look to the lines, because you don't have as much control over it as you would a regular paintbrush. You could use a thin paintbrush too for this. I'm just kind of trying to make just almost like some highlights before I put in the lines of the darker veining. The idea with creating this faux stone look, one of the things is you don't want to see any tool marks. So you don't want to see sponge marks. That's why they recommend using a natural sponge. That's why I cut mine as irregular as I could. You don't want to see anything that looks too uniform to give it away that, oh, this is obviously man-made. So that's why I'm using a feather and spritzing it with water, is to remove any last trace of my tools being there. Now that layer has completely dried, and you can see how some of those minerals have settled in where the puddles of water were. Now for this step, You could skip this. You could stop right there and not do this step in the veining, but I wanted to. Marble has veining mostly. I would recommend that you study the way that real pieces of marble look to kind of get an idea for how the veining goes. What I did is I put the veins in where, like the darker, the last layer that we did with the hazelwood and cobblestone mix, where that's more of the darker bunches, so to speak. Then I tried to kind of put the veining in there and followed that diagonal line. When you see me lift the board, that's because I'm doing the edge. It just didn't show on the camera. Now I spritzed it, and now I'm going through with a thin folded paper towel, so I just have a thin edge, and just trying to remove a little extra. It was a little dark and intense, and I want it to look, if you look at veining on marble, it'll be thin and thick and light and dark, and I kind of wanted to get some more of that inconsistent look to it. So you can see right below my hand there, you can see the beads of water sitting on the Formica or laminate painted finish. If this was a piece of solid wood, it would be a little, or maybe like an MDF or something, it might be a little bit tricky using this amount of water because it really does need to soak in on that. I know that you can get like shelving at Home Depot and Menards and stuff that has like a laminate finish on it, and I would think that would be more ideal for this. The Ultra Grip really sticks amazingly well to it. So now you can see how I've gone through and sort of softened those lines on the veining. Got to do the edge. The final layer, after everything else is dry, is half Victorian lace and half water, so a very watered down paint. And I'm brushing it on really in random brush strokes, just covering the surface. I've already spritzed the surface with water, so the paint is sliding on super easy. It's not drying fast. Going around getting the edges. And the whole purpose of this is to, you know how marble has that layered translucent, you can see through it. That's what this is meant to do, is to give that translucent illusion. After I get that paint on, then I'm going back with my sponge that I cut and just tapping off some of the paint, being careful to remove any trace of any brush mark. The whole purpose of this is not to see any brushes. No, you don't want to see any trace of a tool that you use to create this. That's why that spritz of water after each layer removes those marks. And here are the finished marble slabs. That's after that last coat of Victorian lace has dried. The final thing is to top coat it. I chose to top coat mine with gloss finish tough coat, and I did 3 layers of it, allowing each layer to dry overnight. You wouldn't have to top coat it if you didn't want to, as the Fusion mineral paint is completely durable and has its own built-in tough coat. I just wanted an extra layer to even look more translucent. I used blue pine to finish the wood pieces, dry brushed with hazelwood, and put it all together. And now these 2 shelving units with the faux marble technique on the shelves sit on a cupboard to display the 11 new Fusion mineral paint colors. So the colors that I selected, the Victorian lace, cobblestone, hazelwood, and the blue pine, are all in those 11 new colors. If you wanted to do this marble treatment, faux marble finish, and do it in a cooler tone, you would select cooler colors, and maybe instead of hazelwood, maybe like little lamb. For the white, you could use casement, limestone, maybe for the medium color. So there's lots of colors to choose from, but I wanted to stick with the colors that are in these 11 new colors. Thank you for joining me on this fun tutorial on how to make a faux marble painted finish. Everything that I used in this is available at my shop, frameandfrills.com. I have the full line of Fusion mineral paints, milk paints, all the finishes, waxes, brushes, and if you have any questions, I would be more than happy to answer whatever questions you have and help you with your DIY project.